Hey peeps, welcome back. You just thought you'd got rid of the doctor, but he's addicted to doing videos on his 3 degree of freedom motion simulator platform, so I'm back. And I'm back, guys, to hook up our new wiring into the box and to fire up the rig, to get SMC3 Utilities brought up and show you guys how I've configured that and what power levels I'm running for the rig to be happy. And we'll talk about some housekeeping as far as USB and the actual power to the rig goes and how I've got that set up. So all the power to my motors and to my Fanatec CSL direct drive wheelbase all go through the emergency cutoff switch. They do this via a power board. My steering wheel and my 3 motors via our electronics box here, via the power supplies, all run the mains to the power board, from the power board to the emergency switch. So that way, if anything goes pear-shaped, I'm cutting the steering wheel at the same time as I'm cutting the motors. Now, I want to talk about USB connections, okay? Let's talk about the basics and what I've discovered. Now, this may not be the same with everybody's software. I'm using Windows 10 on my computer. I've got an older, like generation 7 or something like that, motherboard in this with a 960 NVIDIA graphics card. So it runs Assetto Corsa, R Factor 2 and stuff like that without any issues. I can run it 1080p and all the graphics on max, no problems as far as that goes. So that's a bit of a quick overview of the rig I'm using. Let's talk about how we plug all of our stuff in USB-wise. So I'm using a USB hub, and it's a powered USB hub. I want to make sure that my peripherals on the rig are all got their own power and they're not sort of sharing power with what comes from the PC, particularly when it comes to running the Arduino and what we're trying to run with our motors. I don't want any conflicts or any drops in power. So that's the way I do it. But what I found is doing it this way, I have to have a specific order that I plug my USBs in. I need to boot the computer up before the USB hub is plugged in. Otherwise, for some reason, the mouse doesn't work. This may differ from PC to PC, who knows. The USB hub I'm using is a USB 2. I chose that because the Fanatec is actually made to run with USB 2, as well as most other peripherals that are going to end up on the rig. So that is USB 2. It's a 10-port powered USB 2 hub. Now, I have that unplugged when I boot the computer up. Once the computer's booted up and all is working well in the world, I then connect the USB hub. Then last, I will connect the Arduino via its USB cable. So it's the last thing to be plugged in. I'm using a good quality shielded USB cable for the Arduino. I recommend you do the same. So what I'm going to do now, guys, is I'm going to plug in the pot cables from our potentiometers, and I'm going to plug in all of my power cables to my motors, okay, that we've already made up. And we're going to do this, obviously I've labelled my headers here, M1, motor 1, motor 2, motor 3, so we know what's what. And I've done the same for my USB output here. So this is the motor, this is our number 3 motor. So these just plug in and then they wind on. I've got the grommet in here where the USB is already. Thankfully, I was able to scavenge one of those. Now, while I'm down here, I'm going to plug in the potentiometer cables. So the doctor was as careful as he could have been setting this up as far as making sure all the wiring matched each other. But you never know what can go pear-shaped. Okay, motor 2 for me is green. Motor 3 is blue. Now, as I said before, guys, in the last video, motor 2, the doctor just runs blade automotive terminals or spade, wherever you are in the world and however you use those terms. Now, on our motor loom here, with the cables we use out of our motor, and this is for the fast speed, that's what you want to connect up, is the white wire and the black wire. Okay, I connect the black wire to my neg, because that is the neg, and my positive wire to the white wire. Now I think in the last video I gave you guys a bum steer. I said the white wire and the blue wire. That's not correct. It's the white wire and the black wire. I say again, the white wire and the black wire, not the white wire and the blue wire. You can see where my box is sitting here in reference to my rig. It will sit in the front, at the front of the rig. It's out of the way of being able to contact the rig, which is what we want. We don't want to crash into our box. When we're crashing on the north loop, it could come a little closer. The frame won't drop low enough to hit this anyway, but I keep it out of the way, so if the frame dropped down, it's going to clear everything here and we're not going to have any problems there. Rightio, so that's everything wired up. My motors are wired up, the rear traction loss is wired up, the potentiometers are all plugged in out of our little hatch here for our rear one and into our box. So that's all plugged in now. Our power's all plugged in and we're ready basically to boot up the software, then power on. So peeps, linked in the description you will find a link to xsimulator.net, how to wire your 3 degree of freedom motion simulator platform. If you click on that link, this is where you will be brought to. This is the page, guys, that talks specifically about the 3 degree of freedom setup and what you need to do to get your 3 degree of freedom working. Now obviously I have already been through this and shown you guys a fair amount of how to get that happening, but this is where I got it from to start with. This is a page you should most definitely read through at your leisure to get an understanding of what is going on with your 3 degree of freedom motion simulator platform. There's the schematic there, guys, of actually what the pinout is on the Arduino and how it runs with the SMC3 Uno file that will go into your Arduino when you download that as well. Okay, here's a schematic, guys, similar to the schematic I recommended, though this is really only for 2 motors, so better for you to find a schematic of that one that I've shown you in the other videos. The one I printed off, that's a schematic for 3 motors. Track that one down because that is just a less confusing schematic. It's more on the money with what we are doing with our 3 motors. So please, guys, do take the time to read through this. This area here is very important when you first start up your rig and how you need to put your settings into SMC3 Utilities so you don't damage something from the get-go. I will go through that as well at some point. What we're interested in doing here right now though, guys, is I want to direct you to the SMC3 Utilities file to download, so then you can get SMC3 Utilities up and running. So as you scroll down, you'll find this section here with these files. Keep going past this one. There are newer files than this, so keep going down towards the bottom. You'll find another set. These are this set here. So you're after SMC3 Utilities 1.01. That's the latest version. Okay, so grab that one, download it to your desktop, and then you'll unpack it, so then you've got the exe for that file on your desktop. Now this information here, tuning parameters, okay, this is what really relates to the SMC3 Utilities. Read through this to get some understanding of what the different parameters within SMC3 Utilities, what they do. Okay, now to be honest, I have found it a little bit tricky to interpret what some of this stuff means, and I've managed to work out what some of this stuff does more via trial and error. Making adjustments in the parameters in SMC3 Utilities and then basically seeing what impact it has on the rig. Always, guys, with caution, always just adjusting small increments, not going crazy. Otherwise, you know, disaster could follow. Okay, so this is the page to come to get an understanding of all of this sort of stuff, to get yourself all read up and get the knowledge you need to start using this. Okay, let's go into SMC3 Windows Utility and we'll talk more in depth about how to use it and how I've got it set up for my rig at present. Okay, once you have downloaded SMC3 Utilities, unpacked it, and you've got the SMC3 Utilities exe on your desktop, double click on that and you will be brought into this screen. Okay, let's start up on the left hand side. Here's our motors: motor 1, motor 2, motor 3. For me and for you, if you followed the build, motor 1 will be your left hand motor, motor 2 will be your right hand front motor, motor 3 is our traction loss motor. These parameters down here: target, feedback, pulse width modulation, our motor limits, and our input clipping, they're all represented on our screen here. Now, unfortunately, because I have this set up on a computer at the moment, just so I can do this recording without the Arduino plugged in, it's not showing some of these key parameters. Normally, you would have a blue line along here, similar to the blue slider here. That's your target. Okay, the feedback green line here, that's a representation of where your potentiometer signal is. Okay, it should always be in the center following the blue line. If it isn't, it needs to be adjusted. You will need to go through each motor to do these adjustments. Pulse width modulation, that will be a yellow sine wave. Basically, once parameters here are brought up, when it's live and your rig is powered. Our motor limits and input clipping are sorted out down here. They're parameters that are adjusted, so then if our motor levers exceed a certain geometry on the rig, they will be shut off. And you can set that up in max limits and clip input. Out mode, so this, guys, when it's in monitor, you are just able to monitor this screen here and what's happening with that. You can monitor where your potentiometer line is, if it's dead in the center with your blue target line. If it's not, you'll need to go and physically adjust the potentiometers to line up with that line. You're always wanting it to be in the center, obviously with your motor levers level and centered as well. Now, if we were to hit square and we had our power on and we had any of these parameters down here powered up, we would start to see movement on our motor. You can see here how the slider over here is moving, and this is emulating a square wave. If we had our motors powered up, motor 1, if it had power to it and we had these parameters set up with power to them, we would see our rig moving in a square wave formation, then in a triangular wave. So these are just different smoothnesses, if you like, of how the rig would move with these selected. They're ways of testing how the rig is performing with different power levels pre-game. Okay, so this is testing your rig pre-game. Now, something to mention, we can only test in SMC3 Utilities, you can only ever test one motor at a time. We can't test all three motors. Only one can be selected, and you will test each motor individually. Sine gives you more of a smooth sort of sine wave. Motion here is emulating more of what you would get in a game. It's quite a violent, jerky sort of test. It's good for getting an idea of what it would feel like actually in game. Manual here means that you get no movement automated. You do the moving yourself. You would adjust the slider up and down, and however you adjust this, your motor should move accordingly. Or you can simply hit that tab, it'll go straight up, your motor should go up. You would tab down and your motor would instantly tab down, and then you can recenter it there. Okay, let's talk about our parameters here. On the left here, step 1, all this does, guys, this just enables you to add more of your parameters here by steps of 50, by steps of 10, by steps of 1. KP here, if it's on 1, it's only going to go up 1 step. Okay, if I selected 50, it's going to go up by 50 steps each time. That's all that is, okay? So, 10 is probably a good way to start. Now, you will start your rig with everything zeroed. Okay? So then there is no possibility that when you power up your motors, there can be any issues or any cock-ups. So you have everything turned off. right, I would start on steps of 10. You would power up one of your motors and you would start with pulse width modulation here at the max, all right, and your KP. So I would set your KP to basically 450, which is where it actually lives all the time on my rig now. So you can set it at 450, go back to steps of 10. You'll need to probably get to around, have everything on monitor, by the way, guys, when you do this, when you start, okay? Have it on monitor, so then nothing can sort of start moving until you command it. So you will be able to get to probably 100 in your pulse width max before you'll get any movement on your motors. Then come to manual. Okay, don't go into any of these or they'll start your rig moving without any control. So go to manual, then you have all the control. Okay, and then with your little slider, you can start to fiddle around and you can start to test how much movement your rig has. Okay, by moving this around. Or alternatively, you can just hit the tabs and it'll move to wherever this is. You'll see your green potentiometer line. It will follow what should be a blue line here normally when the Arduino is plugged in. As I said, because this is not actually plugged into the Arduino, I don't have a lot of the parameters on here. And I'll do this on the computer that has the Arduino back in my workshop at some stage. But this is an overview and basically what you will need to know. Now what I'm going to do, guys, is I'm going to share with you now how I actually have mine set at currently, and that's with probably about 10 hours of testing on the rig. And this is for the first two motors, our left motor, front motor, and our right front motor. I have my KP set at 450, I have the KI set at 8. Okay, minimum pulse width. I won't be able to set that until I've set the max. My minimum pulse width is set at 60. My pulse width max is set at 150. And my pulse width modulation reverse is set at 120. Clip input is 10 and 100. Okay, so they're the parameters that I'm running on the left hand side motor, motor 1. Motor 2 is exactly the same. Okay. Well, okay, so those two motors are identical in their setup. Now, what I've found to get the traction loss motor working to be a realistic traction loss for me, right, to feel like actually a traction loss from a powerful car, I have my reverse set on 120. I have my power max all the way up to 210. Pulse width modulation is at 70. KI is the same as the other guys, set at 8. But the KP is set right down at 120. These are all off as far as they can be. Whoops. 8. All right. Now, FPID, that's a adjustment that can be made if your motors are making an audible noise in their windings, okay, from the voltage going in. You can adjust this, it will quieten them down. Mine make a little bit of a humming, sort of buzzing noise, right? And if I increase this, it basically stops that noise, but it does change calculations in the PID. So I just leave mine on 1. It's not that noisy that it's an issue, so I just leave it on number 1. KP is your overall power input. Okay, the more of that we have, and it's probably the most tweakable parameter of all of the parameters. It's the most dynamic. That's the one that will really heat your motors up if you go too crazy with this. Okay, so the settings that I've got on here that I've showed you guys are based on quite a lot of hours of testing, getting my rig to the point where my motors are running warm but not getting too hot, and the same with the IBT-2 H bridges, that they're not going into protection mode. Okay, KI, if we have KI set too high, your rig will just start moving and jolting around and carrying on like it's a spastic. No other way to say it. If you increase too much of that, your rig just goes wild, guys. It just starts shaking. It does all sorts of stuff if that is too high, especially if your KP is high. Those two kind of work together somehow. All right, I found to get a really dynamic feeling rig, to feel all the nuances in the road, all the bumps, all the jumps, all of that sort of stuff really translating into the rig, particularly, and that's coming really from motor 1 and motor 2. I'm finding my KP at 450, my KI at 8, my power max here, pulse width modulation maximum at 150. The reverse, now reverse basically will hard brake your motors and force them to reverse. Okay, that's what that pulse width maximum rev goes. So it will cause your motors to hard brake and go in the opposite direction when commanded by sim tools. Keep in mind, if this is too high, it will heat the IBT-2 H bridges. Okay, it will overheat them. I found leaving it at about 120 is fine. They'll be warm, but they won't overheat. Pulse width minimum, so that's the minimum pulse width modulation that we want to throw in to our motors. Any higher than 60 will start heating up your motors. KP any higher than 450 will start heating up your motors. If you leave your max limits at 10 and your clip input at 100, you won't have any shutting down of your motors in the range of motion that works for this motion rig. Okay, so there the settings for motor 1 and for motor 2, they are identical, and these are the settings for the traction loss motor to give it a nice snappy traction loss that feels realistic. Now if it's a little bit too wild, you can always back off your minimum pulse width modulation here, and you can back the KI down a little bit. You can also make overall adjustments in sim tools. All right, these are just the adjustments that we are making with all the hard voltages. This is what SMC3 does. Then there's more tweaking to be done in sim tools, and then you can begin to tweak both. You can get both of them working together to get the perfect feeling in your rig. But for me and the numerous hours I've spent testing, these are the parameters that are working for this rig. Now that is with me in the seat, with my weight. As I said, I'm about 116 kilos, and even today during my test period, I ended up moving all of my peripherals rearward on the motion sim. So this was the great advantage of making all of those things movable. The pedal board, the steering wheel frame, the seat, the shifter, everything. I've moved it all back so that I'm now just slightly behind my uni joint. That has made a big difference in how my motors were getting hot. Okay, and that has meant basically that now I can increase some of these parameters if I want even more violence in the rig. I'm telling you guys, even with these parameters as they are, the rig is quite violent. That video I posted a few days ago, the proof of test concept, that is that's pretty mild the way that rig looks. So I'm looking forward to shooting some new footage of the traction loss end of the rig and the front motors with these new peripherals, with these new settings, with my new setup on the rig, where I'm now over my uni joint back a little bit. I've got a better balance in the rig. I've been able to increase some of these parameters, and it is just amazing. The rig is awesome. It jolts, it rocks, it moves around everywhere. It literally throws you around like a rag doll. It feels like you are racing in a racing car, and that is what it's all about. If you couple that, guys, with a direct drive wheelbase, and you get a decent amount of setting in that, like in a Set A Corsa, I've got that as high as 85 the gain. It is amazing. It is fantastic. It is such an amazing immersive experience. Okay, that is a very quick overview of SMC3 and what everything does. Get to that X Simulator link page and read through that information. Read through it as many times as you can, and that will give you a good understanding of what you're doing as far as SMC3 goes and what your rig is doing with all of that information. And there's pages after that page of comments of people that have tweaked things. It would be worth your while, guys, to sit there and just trawl through that forum, trawl through that page and the many pages of people asking questions, tweaking things, sorting stuff out. Okay, this is what I found so far that's working really well, and I'm sure there's more stuff to be tweaked even within these settings for what I found now. No doubts about it. That's the beauty of this. It's just got endless amounts of tweaking between this and sim tools. The next video I post will hopefully be SMC3 running, okay, with a game with sim tools, and I'll be able to show you the different parameters of what happens in game when these are adjusted. So that's what I'm planning on doing. I'll run a few different races, like I'll do a lap of Nordschleife or something like that with these settings in with these parameters set up in one particular way. Then I'll get crazy and add more KP, add more KI, adjust a few things, do another lap and show the rig what's happening with the rig with those parameters. Then I'll talk about what's happening with the motors, whether they're heating up, whether they're staying the same, and we'll do some experimenting like that in the next video, so you guys can get a better understanding of how this stuff directly affects your rig, your motors, and your IBT-2 H bridges, along with your power supplies as well, guys. We need to keep them in mind as well. If we have stuff too radical in this, we're going to be forcing them to work harder as well. So we want to find that sweet spot where we're getting lots of motion, a realistic feeling in the rig, but we're not overdoing it and we're not pushing our electronics too hard and blowing things up. We're going to leave it at that, guys. Thank you for tuning in. I just want to say thank you to everyone who's subscribed. Really appreciate you guys. Thanks so much for that. And anyone that's watching, if this has been of help to you guys, then help me out. Show me some love and please subscribe. Make sure you like the video as well. Much appreciated. Okay, you guys stay safe. You stay healthy. Take it easy out there.